The ACN podcast is made possible thanks to the generosity of our listeners and sponsors, including the Agile Alliance. As a nonprofit membership organization, the Agile Alliance is an excellent resource to help you along your Agile journey. To learn more about the Agile Alliance and our other sponsors, as well as how you can become a sponsor or supporter of our show, please visit acnpodcast.org for more information. And thank you for your support. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Agile Coaching Network. This is episode number 86. I'm joined every month by a set of great co-hosts, Shauna, Diana, Jorg, Sheila Eckhart, also Sheila McGrath, and Hendrik, and then all of you. I want to thank all of our supporters over the last almost 8 years. And I was going through the podcast statistics. We've had over close to 170,000 plays on all of the different podcast systems. Thank you for all of you who just listen on the podcast. I know for some that can't join the live event because of it's in the middle of the night for where they're at. We're listened to in 120 countries, which is quite amazing. I think about the fact of Agile being all over the place and Agile coaches being all over the place. But to know that you look at, when I dig through the statistics and see there's a small town someplace and I say, oh, there's someone there who's actually looking for community. And that always makes me feel really great. And I know from just looking at the data, we have approximately 3,000 subscribers to the podcast. That means that you were up on your Apple podcast system or, Spotify or one of the other number of different distribution sites for the Agile Coaching Network. And you hit the subscribe button. And some of you even hit the love button. And I think both of those combined to us says that we're doing, after all of this time, we're doing a great job in actually helping to expand the body of knowledge that's around Agile. And then we've had over 5,000 people who've registered for this live event. And we get a handful that join us when it's convenient for them. We do appreciate you being here for the live event because this is how we expand the voice. It's not just the people who are the co-hosts here who kick the conversation off, but it's also all of you have the opportunity to just raise your hand. We turn on the microphone and you get to join the conversation with us. And we want to hear your perspective because even though that some of us have been doing Agile for a long period of time, you actually offer more context. I mean, you're doing this in the trenches every day. You're in a particular country. Agile means something to you. Or if you're new to Agile, you also provide a perspective that we might not have heard. And so regardless if you're new or old to Agile or intermediate, we want to definitely hear from you. We do have the ability for you to subscribe, but you can also become a supporter of the ACN as well. So listeners, as well as our sponsors, provide dollars to us in order for us to pay for the podcast system, be able to pay for the webinar system and all those things. If you go to acnpodcast.org, there is a button there where you can there's one that says buy us a coffee. That directly goes and supports us for making sure that we can afford the podcast system and all the other things. We also have sponsors as well. Our main lead sponsor, of course, has been for over the years, the Agile Alliance. Thank you, Agile Alliance, for providing us some of the operating dollars that we need in order to do this. But we also have other people who've supported us as well. But go to acnpodcast.org and that can give you the information. We will not be doing a December event, but we are going to have a holiday lean coffee session on Friday, December 8th. You can go to newagility.com and you can just scroll down on the main page and find events, hit the RSVP button, and we'd love to have you at the lean coffee session. It's going to be much more open, a little bit more dynamic as far as you choosing the topics that you want to talk about. This is also an experiment for us to see whether or not, because some people said, let's also do a monthly lean coffee. Depending on the attendance level, we might just make that a second event that we do along with the Agile coaching network stuff that we do. If you sign up, we'd love to have you. We're going to make it as festive as possible. But Lean Coffee is fun. If you've ever done it, we will explain the rules of it. If you've never done it before, it's a great format in order for you to share your ideas. The other thing is, another plug is that I'm going to be teaching a fundamentals of leading Agile teams, which if you are a leader in an Agile team, and you're mixed with this hybrid stuff, meaning that you're not purely agile, you're not purely waterfall, you've got a whole bunch of different methodologies that come together, which is like most companies. We are going to talk about it from that perspective, not trying to go say, let's go transform you fully to an agile organization, but as a leader, especially if you're in the first line or in the middle management, how do I do that? How do I balance between these two systems? So I'm going to be teaching a class on that. If you're a more senior leader, this also teaches you the terms that so you can speak with some level of understanding of what those development systems that you have in your environment are. So I invite you to come. I think it's going to be a good class. It's going to be spread over 2-hour sessions daily for the week of the 11th of December. I think that's 2 hours of learning, not 8 hours of learning in one day, especially if we're doing it virtual. Join us. So let's go ahead and get on with today's subject. For those of you who read John Kern's LinkedIn post, and also I think Jim Hinesmith was involved with this call to action. It was interesting. They went to the Agile 2023 event. There was a lot of rumbling about where was the state of Agile. And I know we've done a couple of other podcasts on this subject, but it was interesting to have a couple of the Agile Manifesto authors and then one of the board presidents from the Agile Alliance all finding a little bit of urgency with what was the state of Agile. And I actually had a conversation with John and Jim during Agile 2023, and that provoked me to saying, has Agile jumped the shark, and a couple of other different podcasts that we did before. But this one was specifically a call to action that John did. And I read through it, and I'll give you my perspective on this, but I'd love to hear your perspective as well. But Agile is in an interesting environment right now. I think you've seen the layoffs that have taken place in the industry, companies that are following the old Yahoo trend of, okay, I think we're Agile now, declare victory, and then fire all your Agile coaches. Some of that behavior is going on. And then there's also a lack of investment in employees that's taking place in a lot of companies. We did a strategic agility lab a couple of last month in October, and I can tell you that big Fortune 100 companies, their employees were using our pay what you can pricing because their company wasn't paying for it. They weren't investing in the employees especially in the US market. So it's an interesting time for all of this. And the calling for back to basics, if you look at what John posted, was he had two things. One, which is, how do we reimagine Agile in a way by clarifying and strengthening the fundamentals and making it more accessible? And I'm curious to hear your perspectives on this one, because is Agile not that accessible, or what clarifications might we suggest as a community in order to do a reimagining of it? The second is that if you look at Agile, needs to be extended to respond to the relevant issues of 2023 and beyond. And I think this one resonates with me a little bit because of the fact that if you think about what we continue to talk about, and I've been frustrated at times that when we talk about new methods and new things, and I call, what have you learned new? What experiments have you performed? Is there any new methods that come out? And we seem to be painting the same story with the same methods over and over again over the last 20 years. And so the question is Agile nothing more than Scrum or whatever SAFe pulls into its framework? Or where are those new things, those new patterns? And I think that also, if you think of the foundations of where we're at, both from software, the software people, if you go look at some of the technical community, they've said that, hey, we felt like we've been left behind. You guys are talking about more project frameworks, and we're not talking about the coding methods and those things. And then if you go look at the other adjacent communities that are out there, there's a lot of people that try to disassociate themselves with the brand. So the question is, extending it, what does that look like? And how does it go and work with the existing market and issues that might be there as well? One of the things I just wanted to bring up, and I spent most of my career in a Fortune 100 company, and when I hear back to basic programs, they're not inherently bad, but I can tell you that I had a visceral reaction when I read the back to basics, because back to basics in at least my world have always been, let's go try to take 20th century methods to go fix 21st century problems. And I think that looking back all the way to what the problems that they were trying to fix in 2001, are these the same problems we're trying to fix today in 2023, or what we're looking at in 2024 and 2025? So maybe pulling all the way back to the original methods will do nothing more than just propagate what we've got going on right now. The other thing is that getting more diversity into the conversation, and that is how do we bring more people to bear on the problem and not making it just a group of people, all the same names? How do we make it where we expand the community and the community can go off and work on these things in a way that's a lot more anti-fragile, meaning that it's not just 12 people, it's pretty close to several million people. How do we get several million brought into the fold in order to go work on this? To get the questions going, I just throw these ones up as seeds. You guys are welcome to take this any direction that you want. But how do we begin to reimagine the journey of Agile? What does that look like for now, crossing into 2024? What should Agile look like when we're that journey of when people are starting off, and where should we be leading them to get better customer value delivered? The next part of that is that how do we make it flourish? If it isn't truly in a downturn right now, how do we turn that upside down and help it to flourish better? And then, is this really the goal? Is it the goal for Agile to flourish, or is there some more direct thing that we want to make sure that we're focused on? Maybe employees being happier, or customers being happier, or executives being happier. I don't know. I'm just throwing those out. And then the last one in the question about the reimagine is, does it need to be reimagined, or does it need to be blank? So you can go ahead and fill that in. To kick this off, let's see. Let's go ahead. Sheila, did you want to take a first stab at this?
I can. The first thing is, when Agile, at the time of the Agile Manifesto, it was really mostly client server, small teams. And they were developing where there was nothing in place. It was new. Now we're talking about fitting all sorts of things together. And it's not just a small team. It might be a bunch of small teams working together. But the other thing that's happened is that there are a lot of companies that think that they've implemented Agile, and they really believe that they're Agile, but they never trained anybody. They never talked about it. They don't understand the concept of servant leadership. They're still doing command and control top down, which is anti-Agile. Management likes to put structure in place. So they're putting lots of structure in place and saying everybody has to conform to it on every project, which creates a lot of unnecessary overhead. That's not Agile. So I think we need to get back to what is Agile actually. And then the other piece, though, is how do we organize in large organizations so that we still have that servant leadership, we still have that empowerment of the team to actually make decisions and move forward without having to go through committees. And what I've been seeing happening is that companies implement all this structure that really isn't Agile, but they think they are. So it really, when they talk about back to basics, I think that's really what we need to do, is go back to what was intended to begin with. But I think back to before Agile. I was working in waterfall environments, and people now think that was just one particular structure, but it wasn't. I worked on developing system development life cycles, and we basically came up with menus. If you're doing this kind of a project, you need to do these things, or you need to at least consider them and document why you decided they didn't apply. We're not even, I don't think we've even gotten to that point with the way we're approaching Agile. It's like, you've got to do it or it's not Agile. So I think they need to, that these companies need to take a step back. But the other thing is that Agile was always supposed to evolve. It wasn't supposed to be mired in what was current at one point in time. You should be adapting to whatever changes there are in the market and changes in technology. And people talk about it as something that only would be useful in IT, but I've always thought of it as something that you could use in any part of a business. I've worked on things that were effectively agile projects in the way we were managing them and approaching them that were in a business area with absolutely no systems impact. I think the main thing is the mindset needs to be more open-minded and look at what's actually going to help the organization stay competitive and be able to adapt to change, because definitely change is still accelerating.
With as many agile coaches as there are that have been helping these organizations, what do you think the main inhibitor is? Is it the way that coaching is being done? And is that what really needs to be reimagined? Or is there something inherently that needs to be reimagined, how companies absorb?
I think it's a little bit of both, because I've worked with people who were doing coaching who would say, let's see what the book says. And they're going to do it by the book, which right away they've missed the point, but they've gotten certifications. They're agile coaches. Are they effective as coaches in a company that's still doing a command and control approach and really isn't agile? They probably think these people are great. But if you're really looking for somebody that can adapt to change and not become a dinosaur, the mindset has to change. But of course, everybody thinks that everybody else's mindset should change, not their own. So that's usually one of the toughest things that you have to tackle anyway. But to me, that's where you need to start. And a lot of these organizations, when I've seen what they've done to implement Agile, they change people's titles, but they don't actually train them in a new role. They don't really tell them what the expectations are that are different. So if you have the old mindset with a new title and you call it Agile, does that make it Agile?
No, not really, because I've long since said that if you use Scrum with an old mindset, you're going to end up with the greatest micromanagement tool that you've ever had. You're not going to get the same type of things that I think that were in Jeff's head about how it should be something a little bit more dynamic than it actually could be. I agree with that. Deanne, what do you have on this?
It's really fascinating for me, a conversation. I think there's really a lot of things to unpack, especially with this proposition. When I see, for example, the back to basics, I don't see it so much as, do we want to implement more standard and having, like something in the end that is not really agile? I'm thinking more about, how about having it way more being seen and understood as, rather than a set of methodologies or practices or standards, which is most organizations view agility as, oh, let's install some processes and we're going to have some change. And it doesn't work like this, because as Sheila pointed out as well, there's a lot of things that we need to talk about, actually, the human change. And human change don't go with just like tighter that are things. There's a lot of actually the complexity around here, because when we look at an organization through a human lens perspective, it's a complex adaptive system. When I'm thinking about back to basics, I'm more thinking about the philosophy or the attitude, and making it, like clearer that actually we're talking about it. I think as well, it's like basically there's a real need to link it with more diversity, and especially like the younger generation. So I am like from the millennial generation. Gen Z is actually being right now inside organizations and companies. And sometimes I find it funny in some way that we're talking still about agile versus waterfall. I have people that don't even know what waterfall is, because for them, they basically actually like only just heard talk about working in agility and iteration and customer feedback. So maybe for a big organization that tends to be like more slow as well in the change, or in higher up leadership where, let's be honest, age-wise is a little bit like older, it may still make sense, to talk about agile versus waterfall. But I kind of feel as well then for smaller, younger company, younger leaders, it's not just, it doesn't make sense anymore, that kind of like dichotomy. And let's go back to the basics in a sense of it's a philosophy, it's an attitude. It's not so much about practices or that can be unlimited basically. And I would like to touch down a little bit on the value of coaching and maybe kind of talking about what is really coaching. Because I can see a lot of things when we talk about agile coaching. And personally, I think it's a terrible name, actually. Most coaching, and even what I did when I started in this field, I was actually consulting and mentoring. I was trying to convince. I was not coaching. I think the frame of agile coaching, for example, is way beyond just coaching, and that the coaching itself is like misrepresented, and we cut a lot of things inside. So that's just what I wanted to say. And I completely agree. Putting diversity in the conversation is a challenge, but that's something that we really need so badly.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with your comments. I think that one of the things, I think Scott mentioned this about how the frameworks and the certification mills, if anyone doesn't know the certification mill drama, which is you go through a 2-day course and then you suddenly get the title of a Scrum Master, or you go take a week-long course and you're now in the basics of Agile coaching. In reality, there's a body of work that from a practitionership perspective, hands-on experience, and then eventually being able to coach and mentor people. It's another completely different skill set that's not really fully focused. And it's I'm not saying that the class that you take for learning Scrum or become a Scrum Master, that class is not bad. The class is actually really good. It's just, I think they put too much weight on the fact that you're now been certified, when reality is that's not really a certification. It says you took a class. And I don't mean to, I know that could be controversial to some. Let's see, Hendrik, what do you have on this? And Hendrik, by the way, you're like the fit for purpose guy.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking we need to become a bit cool because it's about agility and not agile. Agile is a set of methods that work, that are really fit for purpose in certain contexts, but sometimes waterfall is the best way to work. Why shouldn't we, if you can plan, if you have if you have high predictability, then for heaven's sake, plan. Don't go agile, use waterfall, make an upfront plan. Yeah. And that's maybe a bit back to basics from my point of view. Remembering that agile is one thing that fits in one context, and other things like design thinking, lean, and so on, all of that fits to the spectrum of things that companies need to do. Maybe a couple of other thoughts I have around the whole thing. What problem do we try to solve with Agile is maybe a thing that goes through my head when I'm thinking about back to basics and so on. And I'm sometimes wondering, has the problem shifted? And I think one of the fundamental things is that, and I think Sheila was in the beginning referring to that, when I think Hendrik 1982 with his Atari 800 computer, one man doing programming a computer game in BASIC. And it was one computer, I was in full control of the hardware of the whole ecosystem there. And nowadays we have everything is in the cloud. There are software ecosystems with tons of interfaces and architectures. Now AI is coming and changing completely the way how you program. Probably in the future, you will rather discuss with an AI what you would like to have in a piece of software, and then the AI will do it for you or whatever. But what's the fundamental problem that we are trying to solve over all these decades? And that is essentially the amount of people that need to collaborate and who have cross dependencies is growing and growing. When you nowadays look into how large the software products are that we are delivering, there's a lot of open source in there. There's microservices. There is, I don't know what. I think agility or agile has been one answer 20 years ago on the question of how can we make people collaborate better to achieve great results for our customers. And that fundamental challenge has not changed. It's just that it became more and more complex. So today you have even more people, more teams, and often internationally distributed that need to collaborate. And have we found all the answers? Maybe some of the practices that we have, Scrum or whatever, they are good, but they don't solve that problem of international widespread collaboration. So how could we solve this in other ways that are in line with Agile? So that's more my angle from which I would start addressing the question of what are we missing? Where do we need to evolve the thing? How can we help large groups of people who are maybe even working in different companies to work together and achieve great results for consumers or societies?
Just to decode a little bit here, my background is I used to be a CPU design engineer way back when.
Wonderful.
And the CPUs had an operational envelope. If people are not familiar with this, it works at a certain temperature and a certain voltage range. And if you go outside of that operational envelope, you get all sorts of crazy results. The system pretty much crashes. And you don't really think about this. You think that it's always going to remain stable, but that's the reason why you have cooling fans on your system in order to keep it within that operational range. And so when you're saying from the stuff that you've talked about in the past for fit for purpose and other things, do you think we need to do a better job at defining the operational envelopes when we go back to basics?
Envelopes are changing. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you say size and complexity and bigness about whatever we're doing and all of the vectors of the complexity of multi-geographical delivery teams and outsourcing and all of the other things that come into play, that there is probably some methodologies that are recommended in that space and give more guidance. Go ahead.
I'm a manager, and when I look at and I have been an organizational coach and in-house consulting for many years. And now I'm responsible for 1,100 people organization making software. And when I look at this, Scrum doesn't help me or whatever. What helps me is the whole bunch of approaches related to systems things, some systemic thinking, organizational design, empowerment, and psychological safety. Those are the concepts that help me, but those are very hard to grasp. And I think that's why many middle or high-level managers are struggling, because there is not like this simple, safe framework, follow the instruction thing for these things, because they are complex. And I think that's a job to be done for us in the community and especially for the coaches.
Sure. And I think along that line is, I know, and the reason why I have a big network of friends who are doing this work is that I know I'm not good at all of that. And nobody can ever be good at all of that. Maybe another portion of the reimagined is that be open about the fact that, hey, it's not me that's good at this area. Let me go bring Sheila in, or bring Jorg in, or bring others in as well, and stop trying to oversell yourself, maybe.
One thing I would say is that you don't need to just look at going back to basics with Agile, but going back to the things that were the roots of Agile as well. One of the things I've been hearing more about lately is continuous process improvement. Now, that's something that was popular in the late 80s and early 90s, well before the Agile Manifesto, but it's still valid because it's still something that needs to happen. And we shouldn't be looking at Agile in a vacuum. You can't really totally get rid of some aspects of waterfall for a couple of reasons. One is that if you've still got old mainframe systems, and in big corporations, you still have old mainframe systems, that still it is better to use waterfall because it's so arduous to make changes that you really need to think them through. Today, we also have lots of apps being developed where you can make changes in a few minutes. But you're still limited by things like the financial systems of the world, that you have an accounting cycle that feeds into a financial statement, that feeds into what's required for reporting and payment of taxes and things like that, that is all based on a calendar year. So you're going to have some elements, and that's what one of the things that Waterfall addressed was fitting into that calendar year. But we need to be doing things like it's waiting a whole year to make changes to a product plan, deciding what the customer is going to want and how it can be done. The technology changes in less than a year. People's needs change in less than a year. So we do need to have a rolling approach to the planning. It can't be carved in stone where there's only one opportunity a year to make changes if a company wants to stay competitive. And even if it's a nonprofit, they still need to address the fact that the environment changes, people change. And there's no reason why you can't apply other methodologies as appropriate. The whole point of Agile was to do what makes sense and not do the unnecessary stuff. So if you then build these frameworks where it's not you can do this if it makes sense, but it's you must do this, which is the way a lot of companies implement it, you're defeating agility. The other thing I wanted to say is that a lot of people think if they're doing something like DevOps, that they no longer need to do Agile. But DevOps really fits into Agile. Kanban works with Agile. There's so many misconceptions about what agility is.
But I think it's interesting as you're going into the fact that, leadership sometimes gets into these fixed constraints, which is, I want everything to be clear. I want everything to make sense. Everything is going to be just a simple thinking. I implement this, I get this, and it's going to be under the fixed governance of thou shall. And that anytime you have a really rigid based system, it's going to break. It's eventually only going to work in certain contexts. So that's one thing that always sticks in my mind as well. Scott, you've been typing a lot in with a lot of commentary. I wanted to bring you into the conversation. Do you want to add some comments to this?
I mentioned that I think that going back to basics to me means, if we're talking about Agile with a big A, the values and the principles. I've gone into companies coaching or doing some other kind of training, and people who claim they've been through this training or this certification, they can't speak at all about the values and the principles. Some of them don't even know what they are. They couldn't give you one of them. They make up some stuff they heard in class about Agile, but none of them are the values and the principles. And the thing I've been trying to do with companies, if they'll give me a chance, because companies, like I said, they aren't looking for organizational change. They're looking to buy something that seems like at this point everybody else is doing it. So we ought to look into doing it. But I try to work with managers and just go through an exercise of stepping through the values and principles and asking them to consider, what does it mean to your organization if you try to implement this value? And then the next value, and this principle, and the next principle. And in a sense, I try to help them to imagine their own framework before they buy some other framework model, and get them to actually think about how they want to change their organization. But like I said, people don't put out RFPs for organizational change. And lots of what folks have been talking about are about organizational change. And that's not what a lot of organizations are looking to do, really. They're looking to buy a solution because that's how they do everything. They buy this solution from that vendor and this solution from that vendor, or they send people off to this class to learn how to do that thing. And when they come back, they want people to do things. They don't necessarily want to change their organization. And for me, agility, when I first heard about it, and I went to my first conference in 2004 and got to meet almost everybody that wrote the manifesto, it was about change.
Well, it's interesting because a number of companies that I've done work for always start with a conversation about, yes, we want change. We want these things. But then it quickly gets down to the fastest way of making change within the organization is just to really just say that we're going to follow a framework, and we're going to make it consistent across the entire organization. And I think that the person who's, coming in sometimes doesn't have and again, I was asking about whether or not coaches need to change. It's pretty hard to say that, look, I think you guys are going in the wrong direction and this is going to fail for these reasons.
I remember put out on Facebook, I think about 2 years ago, he had a picture of himself sitting in a semicircle of managers. He said it was middle to senior managers from a European company. And they had been talking about how upset they were that they hadn't been able to transform their company. They'd been at it for a year and they hadn't transformed the whole company. And Alistair said, they looked at him and said, how long do you think it ought to take us to transform our company? And Alistair thought for a moment and said, given what he knew about the company, he said about 10 years. And there was that dead silence in the room, he said. Jaws dropped. People if they want change, they want it to happen fast. And very often when they say, we want to change they often don't say we want to change our organization. Sometimes they do. But they're not talking about them changing. They're talking about other people in the organization changing. We want them to change. And we thought we brought in this methodology to get them to work differently or do something differently. So even when they talk about change, the question is it them that they're willing to change, or they want other people to change? And how fast do they want it? Like Alistair said, 10 years, because they were talking about transforming the whole company, which to me is what transformation means. Transitioning to an agile behavior is not transformation in my particular point of view.
I do not disagree at all. I think, yes. And how long did it take you to get to where your company is today? And most people, when I ask them that question, how long it took us 5 years to get to this point, why would you expect that your transformation is going to take any time less? And the investment of and I think that's why continuous improvement needs to be resurrected a little bit, which is we are going to continuously improve our organization. And let's make, and I forget, I think it was Eggershine or someone else who said, give us 1% improvement a week. Don't try to go boil the ocean and all of this and flip all the boats upside down. Let's go ahead and just continuously make this place better and fund that.
I've been promoting Kanban more recently. My example is, say on Friday, you decide you want to change your organization, whatever you're doing. And somehow magically over the weekend, everybody gets trained in some framework. Mm-hmm. On Monday, all of a sudden there are new titles, new roles, new meetings, new this, new that. There's a huge amount of change for someone to deal with. And I like the Kanban approach, which sort of says on Friday, you're doing whatever you're doing. And you learn about Kanban over the weekend. And then on Monday, you do the same thing you're doing on Friday. But you institute continuous incremental change and figure out what's the next best thing we can do to improve. But no framework, no rules that say, here's how you have to improve. Just what do we think is necessary to improve? And I think one of the things that the Japanese did well, I don't know whether Deming directly taught them this, but he certainly sounded like he did in various ways, was this idea of trusting the people who do the work to know best what might help them do better. And so let them figure out what the next best thing that they could try. I work for the Bell system, and when there was a big in the 80s adaptation of, we're going to start doing what the Japanese did because they're beating the stink out of us in the auto industry. Everybody jumped on the bandwagon. And I remember they did quality circles, except in the part of the Bell system I was in, the quality circles were managers telling this group of people some new things they needed to work on. Whereas, and it fell flat, of course, because the Japanese had said, you people together figure out what you think needs to be done and tell us how we can help do that. And they just missed the whole point of it. And I think that's what happens with bringing in Agile with a big A, certainly. They miss what the whole point is because they were taught methods, they were taught practices. And the practices are great. The first thing I learned was extreme programming, and I was thrilled about it because I had done something like that about 20 years before and really loved that project. But as soon as I went to my first Agile conference and listened to people like Alistair and the extreme programming folks that were there, Ron Jeffries and Schwaber and Sutherland and stuff, I listened to their thinking behind what they were promoting, because they were all promoting different ideas. And it was that thinking that was so interesting to me, not necessarily the how, but the why. Like I said, Simon Sinek says, first tell people why, not what.
Yeah, I do not disagree at all. And thank you for actually letting me unmute your microphone, because I think that added a lot of good contrast.
Yeah, I guess I missed the fact that I should have raised my hand, but I was happy just typing things in, so I didn't.
No, you were saying enough in the background. It was like, oh, we got to bring him in, get him in here. Jorg, what do you have on this?
Yeah, two thoughts on this. The first one is really the first line of the manifesto, developing better ideas to develop software. So what do we try to make better? The life of the software engineer, the life of the manager, maybe. He's maybe in a worse hell today than the developer is. So that is something that we need to think about. So whose life do we make better? And then how do we enable those people to help others? That is probably something that often gets lost, because now Agile is a promise of salvation. You take it and you get better. Instead, you improve the life of others. And going back to that basic is probably very helpful to get started anyway.
Do not disagree with that at all. Diane, your hand went back up. Did you have something to add again on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it's like something, we keep talking about in the end change, right? Because that's what Agile as well and agility is all about. And it's kind of like in some way that the Agile Manifesto still has the title about, Agile development. But when we think about the current world and the current life of an organization, we need actually agility everywhere nowadays. We need actually to get companies and their people to really become better at change. And the pace of change is accelerating anyway. So we need to get on board about that. And we need to take into the change the human change process. And I think that's where there's a lot of work that still needs to be done at the leadership level to understand the human change process and incorporate the psychology actually of change in the way we implement change. And it's leading as well to the need then to incorporate ethics. So I know it's a subject that is more talked around AI, but I think back to what you were saying around agile coaching and sometimes being able to recognize as agile coaches that, hey, I might not be the right person here for that, or let me take on board other people that have more skills in some parts rather than just me. I think ethics as well needs to be part of the conversation.
Agreed. We're almost getting to the top of the hour, and I'm going to ask the co-hosts what other thing that they would like to add to this topic. So do you guys have a word of advice, because I know that supposedly John and company are going to go off and supposedly start to rally the troops around all this. What bit of advice do you want to give them?
I think the biggest, I have a specific thing that I think one of the basic problems is the way most organizations evaluate managers. They set goals for them that require a certain amount of certainty. If you're doing anything that's really novel and you're trying to make a real change, there's going to be a higher level of uncertainty the bigger the change. Like I've worked on some things that were cutting edge at the time. And sometimes I've literally gone through the entire alphabet and halfway through it again before I found a solution that had any prayer of working. That's not something that most people in management want to do. You've got to evaluate people on the end result and recognizing that, especially when you're trying to do something new, really new, that nobody's done before, there are going to be some things that you learn from. but they're not the actual solution you were looking for. And there may even be some failed projects where it seemed like a good idea at the time, but something in the technology that's available changed and it's no longer that viable. So I think it's basic that companies that want to really be competitive in the future and stay at the forefront need to give not just there needs to be empowerment of the teams, but there also needs to be more empowerment of the managers to make decisions without fear that they're going to have a really bad evaluation and be marched out the door or not get any kind of bonus or recognition, because people want to have that recognition.
Companies have always been around people and how things come together. And I think the contrast of fixed constraints or enabling constraints comes to mind. It's how do we there's always going to be constraints in the system, but how do you make them where they're enabling people to go do these things? I used to say that when I was going through my first Agile adoption as a leader of the organization, I used to say that the decision of going Agile has been made. We're going to move towards Agile. And here's the manifesto, and here's the principles behind it. What's up for debate is how we do it. And that's up to you to go form what is the right methods that we choose to go do this, because we were working on microprocessors. We were not working on traditional software in the IT space. So we had to come up with new methods in order to go fit what we were trying to go do. There's that. Anyone else want to add something to this? I know there's another. Go ahead, please, Jörg.
Just a thought on what enabled agility in software. A lot of this was automated fast feedback. So like automated testing. So maybe we need to look on other ways to get fast and high volume feedback on every change we do. Like how automated we get is a question, but it makes a lot of difference whether people tell you very specifically how you're doing a lot or only once a year. So I think there is a lot of potential to pick on something that provenly works, but it's really hard to transfer.
Agree. We are actually now approaching the top of the hour, and it is time to end the last ACN of the year. I want to remind everyone that on Friday, December 8th, we are going to be doing Lean Coffee. It's going to be at the 9 Pacific time, so a little bit earlier than when the ACN is. This is our December event. We're just going to do a holiday Lean Coffee. We're going to allow just no holds bar. Just go ahead and put out your questions, and we're going to just go through that, or we can just have conversations through that. I've got multiple rooms we can set up and all of that. You have to register though, because the RSVP, that's how you get the invite. So please go ahead and do that. If you got the last ACN newsletter, I think I did mention it in that. The other thing is, please come join me for the class where we're actually talking about all of this, because if you're a leader of an organization, this is the fundamentals of what's taught, is just how do we embrace the principles? How do we do this? How do we shift our management practices so that we actually create those enabling constraints? The next ACN, January 26th, 2024. I just want to say that over this last year, number one, my co-hosts are absolutely fantastic people and fantastic at what they do. And I cannot do this show without them. They are the ones that are the backbone to the ACN as we've ran this, like I said, for over the last 8 years. Thank you. I cannot reiterate that enough. I want to wish you guys all a happy holidays. Hopefully you have some fun. Please go register at the New Agility site and stay in touch with us. And we have forums over there. If you register as a New Agility member, you get into the ACN forums and we can keep the conversation going throughout the month. And with that, I want to say thank you, everyone, and have a great month. The ACN podcast is for educational and informative use only. If you'd like to know more about the ACN community, please come up to acnpodcast.org and support our show.